Hey Aviders, so this is the method we are going to use to learn about Cornell Notes. We are going to talk about Greek mythology. That's going to be the content. So rather than focusing on something from another class, I wanted to add something that I thought you might find interesting. It's super, super cool. I had a class about it in high school and really liked it. So use the slides to help set up your notes. Each slide could be a section, and then each of those sections can be broken into multiple pieces. But keep in mind that all the information you'll need isn't necessarily written down. So you'll have to listen to what I'm telling you and incorporate that into your notes as well. As a side note, I am at home, so if you hear a cat in the background or something like that, please ignore it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. As you're going, if you need to pause the video, the audio, whatever, feel free so you can write down what you need to. But you are responsible for finishing each section the day that it's given. So for example, this first section, you will only have one class day to do it. So if you don't finish, it is your responsibility to get the information and complete the other parts of Cornell Notes. Again, if you have questions, ask, and best of luck. So for who is involved with Greek mythology, there are two different ways we can look at it. We can look at it with the people who believed in this as their religion, and we can also look at it in terms of the people, the identities, the deities who were involved in terms of like the gods. So the ancient Greeks, they believed in multiple gods. And they thought that if they did what the gods wanted, if they made sacrifices, if they acted a certain way, then the gods in turn would help them and do what they wanted. It is also important to note that there are ties of ancient Greek mythology to ancient Roman mythology. So for example, the ancient Greeks believed in a god named Artemis. And the ancient Romans did as well, but her name to the Romans was Diana. So it's the same god, but they might be called something different. They might have a couple differences in terms of where they were worshipped, how they were worshipped, stuff like that, but they are super similar. So if we talk about the god portion of who is involved, there are multiple generations of deities. So the beginning is called the primordial deities, primordial meaning first, is made up of chaos, Gaia, which was the earth, Eros, abyss, Erebus, Uranus, which was the sky, and Uranus was actually born from Gaia. The generation following the primordial deities includes the Titans. You might have heard of them if you have seen the Disney movie Hercules, that they were locked up by Zeus, they were imprisoned, and then later on in the movie they were released to fight Hercules, blah, blah, blah. We can talk about that later. But the Titans, they were the second order of divine beings after the primordials, and they were born from the union of Gaia and Uranus. So that's where they came from. There were 6 males and 6 female Titans, and the main guy that you're going to want to know is Cronus. He became the ruler of the Titans, so he was kind of on the top. Following the Titans were the Olympians, and they were the children of the Titans, and they overthrew the Titans under the rule of Zeus, and they imprisoned the Titans in a place called Tartarus, which we'll talk about later, so they could not have any interaction with the world. So for the what of Greek mythology, this followed people's beliefs, so it was their religion, and they believed in many gods and goddesses. There was not just one, there were gods and goddesses for many facets of life. So when people wanted a certain thing to happen, they might make a sacrifice to a certain god, depending on what that thing was that they wanted. And they made sacrifices to the gods for good fortune, so the gods would then do what they wanted. If you compare gods to people, they are both similar and different. So a lot of the literature says that gods and goddesses acted like the human beings who were sacrificing to them, who believed in them. They had human-like interactions with other gods. They could be childish and do stupid things. But then their main difference was that they possessed supernatural powers. Within the belief of ancient Greek mythology, there were a lot of stories told, and these are called myths. So that's where mythology comes from. And many of these stories discuss how the gods and goddesses organized and manipulated the lives of humans. A lot of the stories that people know about are about heroes. So you might have heard of Achilles, Theseus. A lot of you have probably heard of Hercules and how they interact with gods, how they fight monsters, things of that nature. So a lot of the myths that people read that were used to teach, they talk about the world of the supernatural, so beyond regular human ability, and they often involved monsters. So examples would be like the Minotaur, which we'll talk about later. You might have also heard of Pandora's box. You might have heard of Medusa. These are other characters that are involved in these stories, which followed the beliefs of the ancient Greeks. So ancient Greek mythology took place a long time ago, hence why it's called ancient. So the time period that we're looking at is called Classical Greece, and that is like 600 to 300 years BC. That means before the Common Era. So if you think of it, let's pretend it's the year 2000. That's 600 years before zero, so that would be 2,600 years ago, if that makes sense. So if it was a continuum, year zero would be like in the middle, and then we're working towards the left of time. During the classical Greece time period, there were a lot of famous buildings and temples made, and these were for each of the Greek gods. So some important ones that you are going to want to know are the Parthenon. That's for Athena. It was dedicated to her. She's an Olympian. We'll get into who is in the Olympian order and whatnot later. And the Parthenon was completed in 432 BC. So super old. It is still standing, so kind of cool. Another famous one is the Temple of Zeus. So that was created before the Parthenon. So 460 BC is earlier than 432, even though the numbers might be misleading. So with BC, the higher the numbers are, the longer they've been around, so the older they are. And then there are many other temples that are built for Olympian gods. And these temples were built within the classical period and outside of that. So many of the gods that we're going to cover have a temple built for them, but this slide does not include all of them because there's tons and tons and tons. So the Parthenon is probably the most famous, okay, and it's considered a super important temple. And the Temple of Zeus, I included that because Zeus is one of the well-known Olympians. He had a lot of power. So I thought that would be important to include as well. So if we're thinking about where in the world we are talking about, the map that is on the slide is of ancient Greece. So some of the words, some of the names on there, you are not going to be familiar with, which is totally fine. To give you a sense of where we're looking, So the Aegean Sea, so that's within Greece. If you look at the left of the map, so you're heading towards the west, you see the heel of Italy. Italy is the European country that looks like a boot. So if you go southwest beyond the map, you can't see it, you're in Africa. And then on the kind of central right part of the map that's on the slide, it says Asia Minor. That is modern-day Turkey. So that should give you a sense of where we're talking about and where these things take place. So the Grecian part of the map, so at the top where it says Thrace, Macedon, Thessaly, that's where we're going to be focusing the lectures on. Athens, you probably can't see it, it's super, super small, almost towards the middle, underneath Thebes and Attica. That is a super important city that we will also be talking about later.